Welcome back, everybody. Rudy with the fresh 2017 haircut. With a Dear Rudy episode that I felt was important because of the changing, bizarre market environment. So obviously, Dear Rudy, longtime fan, blah, 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 giggity gaggity. With the uptick of reserve list cards, with Magic on fire, I don't trust the stock market hitting all-time highs in economic turmoil. Well, yeah, it is what it is. Some of that's probably inflation. I don't know enough about cryptocurrency. I've been big into Magic, watching your channel for a while. Well, thank you. I decided I've taken out a home equity line of credit. So that's also known as a HELOC. So for those of you who are not too familiar with this, if you own any form of house or real estate, banks will usually issue what they call a HELOC, or home equity line of credit on a residential property, whether it's your primary residence or a rental property. Depending on the bank, they can issue you up to between 50, sometimes 70, maybe even some higher interest rates. You can go up to 80, 90% of your available equity. Obviously, the higher the ratio you want to go, the higher the interest rate the bank will charge you. Remember, in Rudy's world, anything below 5% interest is attractive. Anything above 5% turns me off completely. It just turns me into a cabbage. So that's how the home equity. So if you have a $200,000 house and you only owe $100,000 on the mortgage, technically you have $100,000 in equity on paper, and you can go to a bank or a credit union and you can say, hey, I've got $100,000 in equity. I'd like to take out a line of credit for 50% of my equity. And they'll say, sure, come on in, Timmy, sit down in my seat. You sign some papers. Sometimes they'll even pay your closing costs, and they'll give you, so when you log in online, you see your checking and savings, you'll see right next to it a line of credit that you can draw on. Usually it has a 10 to 15 year draw period. Before it locks in, you have to pay it off. Now during this draw period, you can keep no balance, or you can use some of it. You can put it back, take it out, you can go in and out, giggity, as much as you want. There's no requirements, and it's very flexible, which is why I'm usually a big fan of having lines of credit, but only for emergencies. Personally, I do have a couple lines of credit. I don't have any balances on them. I haven't used them in probably 4 or 5 years, but I have them in case anything happens or I get into a bind. I can tap quick capital if needed. I don't like using them, but I like the peace of mind of knowing I have them. So, this gentleman just opened a line of credit on, I'm assuming, his primary residence, maybe where he lives, and he says, Rudy, I have access to almost $100,000 in this line of credit. Okay? I'm thinking about buying reserve list cards and sealed Magic cards and blah, blah, blah across the board. Can you give me your honest opinion on this? Do you think I'm able to make good money, this and that? My interest rate, I'm not sure the specific number, but I estimate my interest rate will be between 5 and 8%. Okay. So we have a situation here where a gentleman who's looking to make money. First things first, I respect the passion and the aggressive nature and that burning... That fire to better his financial future, and he's trying to make money. I respect the hustle. I respect that he's trying to do something. Even if I don't agree with how he's going about it, I do respect people who have a drive. So, for those of you who just want to thumbs down the video 2 times, only thumbs down twice, and you want to go ahead and take off for the day, no, I do not recommend taking a line of credit on the house that you live in with yourself or maybe your family in investing in Magic the Gathering. Now, obviously, even if he's paying 6% interest on this home equity line of credit, and he borrows, let's say, $100,000 even, let's say he puts it all into, I don't know, what's a good example? War of the Spark? What's a standard box? Yeah, War of the Spark just went out of print, or a Ravnica, or a Core 20. Let's pick something that's recently out of print, and let's say he picks a sealed product. Even if War of the Spark in 2 years from now is $150 a box, which I think is actually most likely going to happen. So even if that happens, though, the question remains, if you're buying War of the Spark at $89.99, if you pay $90 a box for War of the Spark, and you're paying 6% a year in interest, so after 2 years, that $90 cost basis is probably going to be about $103 to $105 cost basis. So if you have to, and that's the thing that always gets people. It's not that the product won't appreciate over time. It's that you have to weigh the risk reward of when you're leveraging somebody else's money, you have to reduce your return by the cost of the money, the cost of capital. And that's something that people always tend to overlook. And now here's the problem that comes into risk management when you're working for a financial firm, maybe a private equity group, some sort of angel fancy investor, whatever big words, and you want to sound like you're successful. No matter what you're dealing with, it's about the black swans. It's about the future. It's about the only thing that's certain is uncertainty. It's about 1 year ago from this time, I never thought 2020 was going to turn into this crazy virus year of doomsday and, a cultural shift and a bunch of angry people and you got problems and riots and you got viruses and quarantines and it's insane. I never saw this coming. So you have to factor in these unknowns and what I like to say, things that can happen that you didn't see coming. And those are usually the moments that most people get tripped up on, where they're like, all right, we're on a stable path, we're steering the ship straight, we're not going to hit anything, and then suddenly you hit something. You're like, what was that? I don't know. And all of a sudden, there's an iceberg, an alien ship, the Tesla from space, something happens. And those are the variables that usually cause bankruptcies, disruptions. They're usually variables that you never even a million years thought was going to happen. And that's kind of funny how that works. Most small businesses and investors who leverage money don't actually fail because their idea was wrong. They fail because an outside variable completely disrupted the entire concept of the investment, the business plan, the strategy, or whatever they're doing. So let's go back to this gentleman. And again, I'm not saying he's wrong. He could easily take $100,000, put it in, I don't know, reserve list cards and half standard and half reserve list, all half sealed product, half vintage cards, a Rudy approach. And you know what? In 2-3 years from now, that $100,000 could be worth $150,000, even paying the interest of 6% a year. That $100,000, he owes $112,000. He sells the assets. Again, I know that's another conversation. Let's say he easily sells the assets. I know that's not realistic. Let's say he sells them, walks away with $150,000, pays off the $112,000. Boom, $50,000 minus the $12,000 cost of capital. He walks away with $38,000 profit. I mean, yes, it can happen. What if it booms? What if these things double in price? What if the $100,000 goes to $200,000 and his cost of capital is still the 6%, and now he walks away with a boom, almost $100,000 profit, or $88,000 if you take off the 6% over 2 years. So again, yes, it can happen, and yes, it normally does happen. But the problem is this gentleman has no backup plan. He doesn't have anything in place for the what ifs, for the Timmy, for the bamboozle. He doesn't have anything in place for the unexpected. And that's what always gets all of us. I mean, look, I'll give you guys an example. At the beginning of this year, or the holidays of 2019, if you look at a lot of the prediction videos for 2020, the end of the year, the YouTube rewind, oh God, that was scary. And if you look at everything that people thought was going to bring in this new decade, nobody called it. Nobody did. I've never seen a single person who said 2020 was going to be like this. So when you look at Magic, at the end of 2019, Magic was doing very well. Guilds of Ravnica Allegiance was like the hot thing in 2019. We didn't have any major, master set for the holidays, so local game stores had a rough holiday season because there was no big Ultimate Masters like the previous year, or the year before that was unstable. It was kind of a slow holiday season for MTG stores, but the actual products were doing fine. But if you all remember, the reserve list continued to be flat and negative. The reserve list in vintage card investing, all for almost the entire year of 2019, if I recall, was either completely dead money, 0% return, or negative 10, 20, 30% as the market continued to sell off and erode, and people who were leveraged continued to unwind their positions. So, now you fast forward to 2020, everything hits the fan, and now in the middle of 2020, reserve list buyouts and investors are coming back with vengeance, everything's skyrocketing. There's no way to predict it. And that's my point. If you get in these situations where you leverage up and you're committed and something happens like, reserve list tanks again, like it did in 2018, 19, what if it drops 20, 30%? What if standard sealed boxes stop going up in value because there's so many variants and collector's boxes and VIPs and reprints and 427 secret layers that drop on my head? I mean, what if that happens? And if that happens, there's no returns or it's negative. Now this guy's going to be on the hook paying off this debt and making payments for the next 10 years of his life because he thought an investment that was going to save his future ended up setting him back 10 years. So let's talk about this a little further. I don't want to cut the video off. Make sure it's so. So when you look at it that way with the different types of risk rewards, you kind of say, okay, well, wait a minute. Okay. So what Rudy's saying is, technically it's true. the odds are in his favor. I would say there's probably an 80-90% chance that, yeah, he could take $100,000, pay 6% cost of capital, $6,000 a year for maybe even 5 years. $6,000 a year. Let's just pretend no compound interest exists, which we know is not true, but $6,000 a year, 5 years, that's $30,000. Technically, with compounding interest and charging interest on the higher principal, instead of $30,000, it's probably going to be like $35,000, $36,000. So I'm just trying to keep it simple for everybody. But seriously, in 5 years, that $100,000 in MTG, in 5 years from now, is probably going to be around $150,000 to $200,000, as long as he picks some decent things that are just not really bad Timmy decisions, like War of the Spark Mythic Edition at $700 on eBay and buys those. Or, in other words, nothing really goofy or extreme. But for the most part, if he diversifies, buys 10 different sealed products, and then puts a $10,000 position in each sealed product and picks 10 different products, being diversified like that, and riding the 10 different Magic sets over 5 years, and once they all go out of print, he's probably going to do pretty well. So the odds are attractive. I can see why this is attractive for many people. But the problem remains, the black swan can always completely wipe you out. And of course, for those of you who aren't familiar, that haven't been around this channel for a long time, the term black swan is pretty much that. It comes from the probabilities and that, what was the guy's name? Wasn't Malcolm Gladwell, was it? No, the Nassim. I forgot how I can't see it, but I don't want to pull my stuff out. It comes from the concept that 1 in every million swans, the white swans that are born, 1 in every million, I think it is, are born completely jet black, and they look really cool. But the problem is, nobody knows why. It's just a genetic anomaly that's completely unpredictable. Nobody knows why. But then every so many million white swans, there's just a jet black one from a genetic weird thing. So, in other words, you don't know what's going to happen. It just happens. And, if you bet the farm and something turns on you, you run the risk of burning down the house. And that is the most dangerous thing. That's one of the biggest questions I always talk to people privately if they're presenting something to me about, Rudy, should I do A, B, and C? One of the first things I always present is, if it goes wrong, how will you survive? Can you rebuild this? Can you get out from underneath this? If this $100,000 investment in 5 years is flat and you have to sell and you get your $100,000 back, but you're out the interest for 5 years, so you're out $30,000, $40,000 in interest. Can you make the payments? Can you afford to pay that off? Do you have a reserve? Okay, what if the $100,000, you picked a product, or you spec'd on a standard card, and you lose half the money. The $100,000 goes to $50,000. I know it's a terrible example, but are you going to be able to pay off that $100,000? Can you make the monthly payments from working your regular job to get out from under this over a 10-year period? Does that scare the crap out of you? Are you prepared for that? Do you have cash reserves? And these are the questions that get into risk management. It's not about, remember, and I haven't said this in many videos, probably been at least 6 months to a year. Amateurs always ask the question, how much money can I make, Rudy? Professionals always ask the question, how much money can I lose? And that's always a very distinctive difference between someone who's new in the collectible, investable Wall Street world, even in real estate, or somebody who's been around the block. Somebody who's been through 2008, been through 2020, been through maybe 2001, or maybe a .com, or a savings and loans crash of the late 80s. People who've seen things and been around the block, they have a more cautious, they ask more questions, they do a little bit more of the double D's, which is the due diligence. Not you bunch of perverts out there. They focus on the double D's. And doing that due diligence really helps, give you a more clear, transparent perspective on what you should do. So to go back to before I end this video here, this gentleman, it's great that he has access to a $100,000 line of credit. I think it's like $70,000, $80,000, but let's just it's great that he has access to this much capital. But, to be cheesy Marvel Spider-Man, when you have that kind of power and access to that kind of capital, Spider-Man, it comes with great power, it comes with great responsibility. And the more money and leverage you have is extraordinarily dangerous. And that is why people who have access to that, you must have very strong-minded people running the ship and guiding it, because the more leverage is the most powerful, dangerous instrument in the investment financial world. No company ever went out of business without some form of leverage. No successful person who became a millionaire or billionaire ever became at that level without some degree of leverage. Leverage is the thing that makes or breaks the investment world. It's the thing that turns millionaires into billionaires. It's the thing that turns millionaires into bankruptcy. And leverage is the ultimate core component of this. And getting a line of credit to leverage somebody else's money to amplify your investing purchasing power is a textbook example of this. So to wrap up the video, it's really cool that you have that kind of line of credit and investment. But I can never recommend that you use the house that you or your family, or maybe even by yourself. I cannot recommend that you leverage the house and the roof over your head to invest in a collectible without having an exit strategy or a oh crap strategy. The risk is simply does not justify the reward. And you know what? Even if you pick out these things and it works, that's great, but the risk isn't worth it. And you have to remember that there's also a difference between, being right and wrong is one thing, but the degree of risk may be so high, it's not worth being right. And these kind of discussions and thought processes are the kind of things I usually talk to with certain people or investors or distributors or store owners privately when I'm discussing with certain types of deals, whether it's magic or real estate or whatever it is. It used to be a lot with stocks and bonds when I had a real job, but obviously, back in my parents' basement here, can't even get a haircut. But, I just wanted everybody to learn something today. I thought you would appreciate a good financial discussion. And for those of you out there with credit cards and you get those 0% offers in the mail, you want to borrow leverage, student loan money, you want to use some sort of line of credit, just remember this kind of conversation. No matter how confident you are, you cannot predict the future. You need to have a best case scenario, a worst case scenario, and the most likely probable outcome. And you need to be prepared for the worst, but you need to be hopeful and be shooting for the best. And that's kind of the degree of how you kind of need to make those kind of not Venn diagrams or decision trees and all that crap. Well, some people make the little bell curves and the different deviations of probability, whatever you want to call it. But it's important to really be cautious on these kind of things. So that's all I have today. Hope you guys learned something. Have a great day. Very cool stuff. I love talking about this stuff.